My name is Mariette DiCristina, and I'm the Dean at Boston University's College of Communication. I'm also a COM alum and the parent of a recent BU grad. Today's topic is one that I think is on a lot of our minds. The power of purpose. Move your organization and your career forward. This COM Talks topic is sponsored by COM's wonderful Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Committee. This session is being recorded and will be available later on the COM website, where you can also find information about our future events. We communicators have tremendous power to change the way others think and feel and act. And as Spider-Man might have quoted Lord Acton, with that great power comes great responsibility. Communication that's animated by a deep commitment to important causes can multiply our impact as communicators and help us to help the world change in positive ways. All of today's speakers have had very successful careers in communication and are leading with purpose. They're doing so in different ways, and I'm really excited that we can learn from their firsthand examples and practical advice today. Now let's meet them. First, I'd like to welcome Dr. Raul Fernandez, who is Associate Dean of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion at BU's Wheelock College of Education and Human Development, and is also a COM alum. He is also the first Latinx person ever elected to the Select Board in Brookline. Nice to have you here, Raul.
So glad to be with you. Thank you.
Next, let's say hello to Trisha Raynard. Trisha is the Executive Director of Empower Peace, an organization created to build and advance mutual respect among different cultures around the world. Trisha also manages public awareness campaigns promoting social issues, including environmental protection and gender equity. Hello there, Trisha.
Hello, thanks for having me today.
Thanks for joining us. Sara D'souza is Senior Director at Vertex Pharmaceuticals, where she manages external communication and corporate reputation initiatives. She is the former professor here at COM as well, and is an alumna of both COM and Questrom. Welcome, Sara.
Thank you so much for having me. It's a joy to be on the panel with all of you.
I'm so glad you're here. Now let's say hello to Matt Wilder, who is principal of Wilder Strategies. There he's led the communication efforts for Yes on 3 campaign in Massachusetts, which successfully upheld the state law protecting transgender people from discrimination. Welcome, Matt.
Thank you, so glad to be with you.
And now I'd like to introduce our moderator, Ann Danahy. Ann is Senior Lecturer here at COM in the Department of Mass Communication, Advertising, and Public Relations. Before coming to BU, Ann ran a communication research and consulting firm, Strategic Opinion Research Incorporated. Thanks so much for moderating, and over to you, Ann.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Dean DiCristina. It's a pleasure, and I'm so grateful for you all taking time out of your really busy schedule to share your experiences with us. And to those of you who are watching, thank you for taking time to tune in today. I think it's going to be a really exciting talk for the next hour. It's going to go really quickly, I'm sure. So let's just start. I want to find out about your career paths and how purpose has played a central role in your career and how it's led you to your current role of creating social change. So why don't we start with Raul?
Sure. You know, I'd love to say that I had it all planned out, but not quite so. And before I forget, thanks to the Dean, thanks to you, Ann, and thanks to Allison and everybody for putting this event together. I think this is so important to think about. But what I will say is that there seems to have been some kind of thread connecting all the different experiences that I've had. And that is a desire to work on behalf of other people and to sort of use like many of the other panelists here, to use my limited time on this planet to try to, advance the rights and the access and ability for everyone else here to thrive, in particular those who for so long have been locked out of our politics, locked out been on the short end of policy making, and so there's been some kind of drive. I couldn't tell you exactly where it comes from, but some kind of drive in me that has led me to the kind of career that I have right now. And you know, what I would say about that is that, you know, if you feel that kind of drive, it's certainly something that you should follow. And I'm excited to hear about how some of the other folks in the panel have followed that drive in themselves.
Great. And Raul, can you tell us a little bit about what you do?
Yeah, well, a few things, right? And so you got some in the intro there, but on the BU side, I'm the Associate Dean for Equity, Diversity, Inclusion, as well as a faculty member. I teach graduate students in higher ed. And, you know, there it's really about, you know, thinking about equity in everything that we do, from, you know, the typical, you know, do we have the right people in place to do the work and to go out and teach and lead, but also do we have the right policies in place, the kind of policies that make it so that when anyone steps foot, you know, on in our college or on our campus, that they feel like it was built for them, like it was made for them. In my other life, I'm a select board member in Brookline, and that is all about policy making, and for me, policy making with an eye toward equity, and making sure that folks in our community feel like it is for them, it is made for them, and that it works for them.
Great, thank you, thank you. Matt, how about you? Can you tell us about your career path and how purpose has kind of played a central role in your career and what you're doing today, that's led you to doing today, making social change?
Thanks, Anne. Yeah, I mean, like Raul, I didn't have it planned out. My career started in television news. I was a producer at Channel 5 here in Boston, the ABC affiliate. And from there, transitioned to the other side, to PR, and worked initially for the city of Boston under Mayor Tom Menino as the spokesperson for the Boston Public Schools, and then eventually worked for Governor Deval Patrick in his education office, first as communications director, and then chief of staff. And since then, I've been running my own communications consulting firm for the last 6 years. And in that space, I really get to work with a bunch of different nonprofits and campaigns, as you mentioned, the Yes on 3 campaign, which we can talk more about. But these are really purpose-driven organizations that are doing good work on behalf of people. And I get the chance to come in and help them tell their story to a broader audience, which obviously helps further their mission, helps further their cause, helps in some instances helps them raise money so that they can do the work that they need to do. So all of that is, you know, touches all the work that they do. I'm happy to help drive that work forward, and so it's exciting.
Great, thank you so much. And Sarah, how about you?
Yes. So similar to Raul and to Matt, I would say that my career path definitely was not planned out in any way. I will say, though, that each job change I made along the way was very much sort of driven by the people and the purpose of the organization. So I would say that in some ways there was a common thread that ran throughout. Over the years, I've had the joy of working in small, medium, and large agencies. So working for all different types of companies of all different sizes and sectors. I was at a firm when we created what's called our, it's CSR, which is Corporate Social Responsibility Practice. It was the first time that this was even a thing back in the 90s, the early 90s. And it allowed me to see the companies that were really sort of built with this in mind versus those who had to add it on later. And that's what led me to many great companies like Starbucks, like Coca-Cola. But where things really started to click for me and sort of having a larger purpose was when I started to work for many healthcare companies. Really, at the end of the day, seeing and getting to hear directly from patients who we were helping was really impactful. And that to me is sort of where I started to really enjoy what I was doing. And so that led me to where I am today, which is at Vertex. And I also think that instantly, based on all the companies I've sort of served over the years, you can sort of see a company that has either they've built around this purpose or they've added it on. And I really believe that Vertex has that. And it's been a great joy being able to do that, being able to communicate about all the great programs they have. And at the end of the day, I think the bottom line for me has been seeing, you know, management and executives who really sort of care about having this at the root of what we do, It makes everything easier, and it makes my job as a communicator a lot easier as well. But I would say that, again, it wasn't planned out. It definitely kind of was pieced together with a common thread, and that was that I was always seeking out that that larger kind of purpose at all of my roles.
Great, thank you so much. And Trisha, how about you?
Well, we're going to run the board on this one because like my colleagues here, I did not have that plan. The only plan I had was that I wanted to be in communication. So I knew that. And I happened to get my first job at a company that worked on a lot of like public awareness campaigns and social issues. And that's where I discovered, you know, once you learn about an issue, I mean, we were working on all kinds of things from domestic violence to climate change, breast cancer, you name the issue. I actually say a lot that we're really great at cocktail parties because we can talk about an issue for a solid 3 to 5 minutes because you learn so much. And when you do that kind of work, you get really committed, not only to the client and doing a good job, but you're committed because you believe in the issue. And I think that makes a big difference. You know, when we first started talking, you talk about a purpose-driven life. I didn't know that that's what I was doing until I left. So I did that job for about 5 years. And then you're young, and I figured before I get married, have kids, I need to start building on my career. So I looked for another job, this new job, great title, great money. But I just found that I was not passionate about the work. So then I said, okay, I need to look at something else. So I got a different job. It included travel. Again, great location, great money, great title. I just wasn't passionate about the work at all. Still in communications, but that's when it dawned on me that working on issues that I cared about was really where I wanted to be. And that's when I actually came back to my first job. So I'm actually back at the place I started from, and I've been here for, I think, well over 20 years altogether.
Can you tell us a little bit about what that job is and what you do?
Sure. So I actually do two things. I work for a company, it's a Rendon Group, and we do a lot of public education and public awareness campaigns. And that ranges from, like I said before, it's still, we work on a lot with a lot of nonprofits. So it could be helping families, it could be, you know, getting people to know about where to get shots for a flu. I mean, it really runs the gamut. It's different all the time. But I also am the executive director of Empower Peace. And that is a nonprofit we started where originally it was to bridge the gap between two different cultures, actually the whole world, especially after 9/11. Because what we were finding is young people, especially, they were getting their information from things they were seeing on TV. So we actually directly connected them through video conferencing, and they got to talk to one another and just learn about each other. And when we first did it, we asked both sides, what do you want to know? And what we found was they wanted to know, do you watch TV? What shows do you watch? What music do you listen to? They weren't talking about politics. They weren't talking about things going on. They just wanted to learn about each other. So that was really eye-opening for us. Fast forward, 2004, we held a young women's leadership program just to get women involved in politics. And it was at that point where I give Rick Rendon the credit for this, the man behind our Women to Women International Leadership Program, where he said, you know what, if you really want to make positive change in the world, you really have to get more women involved. So the last 15 years, we've been doing an international leadership program for girls all around the world, 15 to 19 years old. And they come here each summer for a super intense 10-day program. Where they talk about the issues that impact women everywhere. And they have to develop, they learn about leadership in themselves, and they learn how to build an action plan to take action in their own country on an issue they care about.
It's fantastic, fantastic. Thank you. So I think what's really interesting is all of you are leading purpose-driven lives in your careers and really making a difference, but you're all doing it in very different ways. And I think that's important for people to realize is that, you know, the field of communication is very broad. You can have a purpose-driven career, and it can be in a corporate role, it can be in a nonprofit, it can be in an educational setting, and it can be working in your own firm, working with many progressive organizations. So I think that that's really important to note as well. And you've all been incredibly successful. The other thing is, I think it's great to know that you don't have to have it all planned out. I think that I see students who are seniors and thinking, I need to do this, I need to do that, I need this kind of internship. If I don't get this internship, I'll never get a job. And I'm like, you know what? You figure it out, try different things. And an internship tells you also oftentimes what you don't like about something, right? And so really nice to hear that everything's going to be okay for them. So, so can you tell me, what would you say was your proudest moment in your career where you realize that the work you're doing is really making a difference? I'll start with Matt.
Well, this is an easy question for me to answer. As you alluded to earlier in the panel, I was very fortunate to work on the Yes on 3 campaign 2 years ago. This was a ballot question that was put before Massachusetts voters, asking them to uphold a law that had been passed a couple years earlier, protecting transgender people from discrimination in public places. So this is everywhere people go, from the supermarket or the movie theater, every place we can't go now because of COVID. We had won that, we had passed the law through the legislature a few years earlier, and then opponents of transgender rights had put it on the ballot for repeal. And so this changed the game. We had to take a kind of pull all the stops out to make sure that this law was held in place. And I was fortunate enough to be hired to lead the communications effort for that campaign. And we won. We won resoundingly. And I think that was in large part to the communications campaign and strategy that we ran. Also, we ran a very, in-depth field campaign where we're physically knocking on doors. That certainly had a big impact. All of that combined made for, I think, a better day and a better Commonwealth to live in. And it was a really proud moment to be with those people who had become friends of mine, who had been living in a state where their rights were possibly going to be taken away, and the protections that made them feel safe going about their daily lives could be taken away. And so when we won, and we won so resoundingly, it was a very proud moment.
What was election night like?
It was pretty intense. We had a hotel room at the Fairmont Copley Hotel. We had a ballroom with people waiting for the results. I think we all felt very good going into election night, but you still don't know. As we know from elections, anything can happen. So we were waiting and watching the results come in, and eventually I got a text message. It's just a little bit of behind the scenes, how you learn these things. We were a little scrappy campaign. We didn't have people all over the state telling us the results that were coming in poll location by poll location. I got a text from a Boston Globe reporter who told me, wow, your opponent just conceded. And she sent me the press release, and that's how we found out. And it was a really joyous moment for a lot of people.
Wow. Well, congratulations. That was a great success.
Thanks, Anne. Yeah.
Sara, how about you? What would you say is your proudest career moment?
Sure. Hard to follow after Matt's because that one is very, very noteworthy. But for me, it's maybe not the proudest moment in my career, but one that's very recent and one that I'm very proud of. So at Vertex, every year our Vertex Foundation has what's called our Day of Service, and we have employees across the globe going out and into the community, giving back, volunteering our time, really kind of getting in there and giving back in ways that that we can from a people perspective, getting our hands dirty, building things, cleaning up things. This year we were brought in a couple of weeks ago with our executives to say, how are we going to communicate to our employees that we're not doing this year, because we're not doing this with COVID. It's really tough. It's a very, very different environment. We're not even allowed to go into our office. How are we going to be allowed to go into the community and all of the places where we work? And so rather than coming up with a communications plan, I kind of at the table there, a couple of us were sitting around saying, look, why can't we do this? We can figure out a way to do this. This is when the community needs us more than ever. The organizations that we support need us more than ever. I really think we could look sort of beyond what we normally would do and be creative about how to do this. So we did just pull off our day of service. It wasn't one event. It was a series of events that took place over a week. We wrapped that up last week. It was 1,300 employees across the globe participated in 75 different events that we had to be very thoughtful about. How do we do this safely? How do we get our employees to participate in ways that, they're not allowed to go into the community? Can they do this remotely? Dozens of organizations we worked with, we partnered with them to figure out how to do it in a safe manner, but in an effective manner. We didn't want to just sort of go on Zoom calls and talk about how we could help. We wanted to really help. So a lot of planning, a lot of behind the scenes logistics went into play. But we were really, really proud of the impact we made, and that we pulled it off. And more importantly, it was a really great morale booster for our employees who are all working remotely. We haven't been together in one place now for about 7 months. So for us to be able to come together for this 1 week, to do things where we were all on the same page and really giving back to the community was really special. So I'm very, very proud of that. And I hope that, in the future, in months to come, we can sort of think out of the box for these types of things, to really give back to the people who need us. I feel like it wasn't a time for us to turn our backs and say, sorry, we can't do it because we're remote right now, but we're here for you instead. So it was a really nice message to be able to send.
Yeah, and what a commitment, because I'm sure that it was so much more difficult to pull that off than ever before. It wasn't just like an organization and volunteer.
It does. We did. So we had a lot of packing events where we'd have to source the materials, mail them to all of our employees who are living in all different locations, pack the materials, and then mail it all back to the organization. We did things like that. We did a lot of mentoring over Zoom, which was really nice. We got to talk to a lot of students and other organizations. So giving that kind of our knowledge and our expertise and our capabilities. And then the last thing we did have in some markets, we did have the ability to go out into the community. So we did some cleanup events. We went into parks, we went into schoolyards, where it was safe to do so. But that was only in just a couple of markets where the numbers were lower. So it was a great all around.
Fantastic. Thank you. Trisha, how about you?
All right, well, first I want to say, Sarah, that is phenomenal, because that takes a lot of coordination, and that is great that you're able to still pull that off. And Matt, seriously, congratulations on your work. That is, what you're doing is so important. So really happy that it was successful. So proudest moment in my career. I will focus on the Women to Women program, because there's a lot of times that I get, when I see a young woman applying for college that she never even would have thought she would have gone to college before she came to the program. So when our program has introduced opportunities to these young women that they never would have gone after, they never would have known about. So that would be one thing. But I think the one that stands out is for like the past 5 or 6 years, we've had a group from Chad. And if anyone is out there familiar with some of the issues in Chad, there's a lot of them, but the ones that they come every single year, we do ask them to identify an issue. Every year they come and they focus on forced marriage and FGM. And that's the issue that they want to go home. What I didn't know was that every year they go home and they join the alums from the year before. And they have started to build a network. And what they've done is they then help choose which girls are coming to Boston for the next year. So they all know each other. And what they learn, they go back and they build upon the education that they got from whoever went the year before. And just recently, I want to say it was a couple of years ago, they sent me a picture. What they've done is they started their own movement in Chad, and they've asked other people to join them. They had about 80 people in their group holding signs like saying no to forced marriage. They had their Women to Women shirts on from all the different years. And then they also involved men, because that's something we talk about too. Like, you can't make change alone. You have to bring people together. So to see everything that we tell people, to actually see it in action was pretty phenomenal. So I would chalk that up there.
Yeah, I think that's pretty amazing. That must have been unbelievable to see that, because working so hard on these conferences where you see them for 10 days, but to see what comes afterwards and all the success work that you're doing. So that's really wonderful.
Thanks.
Raul, how about you?
Yeah, for me, it's always the feeling when students make good and seeing where they end up afterwards. And I'm just continuously, proud of them. I'm thinking about, of course, one moment where I got to be at the U.S. Capitol to watch one of our alums and one of my former students and friends become a member of Congress. And that's Congresswoman Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, who, I mean, could you be more proud of anyone? I certainly, but also seeing all of the other former students that were there too, and how all of them are being purpose-driven in their own lives. Really, just I felt good about the work that we'd done so many years before with all of them, and just a reminder that we don't always see the fruits of our efforts right away. Sometimes it takes time, and to be some small part of the development of young people that themselves, as Howard Thurman said, the namesake of the Howard Thurman Center, are going to go to the ends of the earth to do work is really, it's meaningful in a really, I don't know, a way that just hits you kind of right here, to see other people make good like that.
Yeah, that's amazing. I hear you on that. Seeing students succeed and it's really special. So this leads me to my next question, is that it's not always easy, right? So what are some of the challenges, the greatest challenges in terms of leading with purpose? What are some challenges that you've encountered? And I'll just open this up to whoever would like to answer the question.
I'll start.
Okay.
Resources. It always comes down to resources, and trying to find, and it's not just to fund your own program, but if you want to do something more, like I would love to be able to eventually fund girls' education, because so many of them can't continue their education when they go home. So it comes down to that for me.
So how do you navigate that? How do you help? How do you navigate getting resources?
Well, for us, it's constantly, trying to find funders to bring girls over here, because what we don't want to do is have financial restraints stopping them from coming here. So that's one thing. So we constantly are working on funding. The next thing is, when we have someone that wants to go to school, what we try to do is connect them with either the embassy that may have a connection with Education USA, try to find scholarships, but it's an uphill battle. I mean, education is super expensive.
And do you do a lot of sponsorship programs, like corporate sponsors, or is it?
Do we, or do we try to get them?
You try to get corporate sponsors. Is that part of the strategy, or is it government funding, or?
It's a little bit of both. Actually, US embassies have been great partners for us, but it's every year. It's not like it's a given. Everybody's budget changes. So every year, not only do we have to put together the program and promote the program, but we also have to find the funding to make the program happen.
Yeah, that is.
So that's one for sure.
I can jump in here, Dan. And I think that one thing I think about in regards to this question is creativity. So oftentimes we're competing for attention, particularly in the media. That's a lot of the work that I do, is trying to get reporters to write about issues that I'm working on. And we're competing with everything that's going on in the world. I'll give you a great example. I'm working right now with a foundation here in Boston that is working with the city of Chelsea to provide guaranteed income to residents there that are struggling with the economy because of the coronavirus. And that is a great story. It's one of the largest pilots of that program in the country. 2,000 households now getting $200 to $400 a month to help buy food for their families. And we are, of course, that's a great story. Any reporter would want to write about it, but we're also in the context of a national presidential election, a global pandemic that is dominating the news. And so just trying to find those ways to be creative about getting attention can sometimes be really hard. During the Yes on 3 campaign, we had to get creative. At one point, we brought Laverne Cox, the transgender actress, to Massachusetts. She was great. She's a very fierce advocate for transgender rights, obviously, but bringing her in was a little bit of star power to our issue, and that helped us get attention.
Was it difficult, like making the connection and bringing her in? Was there a lot involved in doing that?
You know, that she almost volunteered to do it. We had a great connection with someone very close to her through the ACLU, which is excellent. So getting her was not the issue. It was finding the right time, being strategic about the timing and when we wanted to do it, so that we got the most impact from her being here.
Wow, fantastic. Thanks.
And I would add to what Matt said. So staying focused seems to be our biggest challenge. We have, in any given week or day, so many different competing priorities. I would say our company as a whole and our executives are, deeply focused on these issues. However, stealing their time or their resources, or similar to what Trisha said, just being able to, get the focus throughout the week is hard. I would say another thing that's a bit counter to what Matt said is we do a lot of great programs. We put together a lot of different events and initiatives for the communities in which we serve and in which we operate. However, our executives don't always want to communicate about them. So we do lots and lots of employee engagement around these issues, but then my job is to convince them to communicate about it externally. So the external piece is not always innately there at Vertex. I would say we tend to be maybe a little bit more humble about that, and it's something that I'm often trying to convince them of. But internally, we do a great job. I think it's a really great engagement tool for us at this point to get everybody kind of on the same page and moving toward, common goals. It's been really effective.
Great, thank you.
I'll add one other thing is just thinking about for folks who are trying to make change. One of the difficult things we run into is that for people in power to maintain the status quo, all they have to do is say no. They don't need to launch a compelling counter argument to your well-researched, very compelling, smart, moral, whatever it is, argument for change. People in positions of power can simply say no. And so, one of the things we've got to do is work to, I say, like, change the people. So change their hearts or change their minds, or when possible, change the people themselves to different people who will make different decisions. And that's a lot easier in the political sphere, where you can sort of build consensus, get other candidates. It's a lot different in a company or organization where we don't just have the ability to, the employees can't just take a vote and change the supervisor or change the manager, right? And so, but in either case, I think it is important for people to gather together and to continue, whether they're students or employees or residents of a community, to coalesce and build support for the changes they'd like to see. That is what has changed universities and communities and everything in between over time. And again, it doesn't always happen right away. And that's one of the key things to understand is that advocacy and activism it's collective and it's cumulative, and it takes place over time. So I was saying this summer at some of the protests that were taking place, and I was out there, and you get a bit of deja vu where you feel like, hey, I've done this before, I've been here before, and I didn't get the change I wanted. And that's one example. I've felt that at the university. I felt that in the community where I live. But the thing that I try to remind myself is that this is all part of it. This is all part of the long series of things that needs to happen in order for that ballot measure to get passed or that policy to get changed or whatever it is. This is all part of it. And when I think of it in that sort of that larger view, it makes me feel good about even what doesn't necessarily feel like progress at the moment, that is part of what's necessary for progress to occur.
And I think that that's a really good point, because to the young person who's just getting involved for the first time, they might be disappointed, right? And saying, we have so much to do, but it's every step that you take is making a difference, and being committed to that and keep on going. That's great. So one thing I want to remind everybody is that we're going to stop at around 10:15 to take questions. So if anybody who's tuning in has any questions, please address those in the question and answer box, and I'll be monitoring that, and we'll definitely leave time for questions and answers. So my next question is, so thinking about the college graduate or the person who's thinking about pursuing a purpose-driven career in communications, what is one thing you would tell your younger self? Is there anything that you wish you knew, or any advice that you could give?
I have
I'm
something
happy
in.
to- Oh, sorry.
go
Go
ahead.
ahead. No,
So
no, please.
the first thing that comes to mind is that it's not always perfect. There's not always a perfect course. I think we started our discussion with that. And that if you're in a position or a role that may not be as purpose driven as you would like, you can always participate in organizations outside of work. And I think that's kind of where I probably, did a lot more of when I was younger, but that got me to where I am, to figure out what you like and what you don't like and what's going to resonate with you and where your passion might be. I think that, you can volunteer on a campaign, you can volunteer for a nonprofit, you can give back in your community, you can volunteer your time, your hours. All of that sometimes needs to be done outside and above and beyond your day job in order to sort of make all of this happen. And then over time, I think those are when those types of opportunities will click, and they might even turn into a role. I remember volunteering on a campaign, and I was doing it at night while I was working all day. And I remember thinking, like, at the end of the day, why am I doing this again? That then turned into a role. So I think there's definitely a lot of that needs to happen in order to really find that perfect sweet spot of a job.
Oh, that's great advice. That's fantastic. Good. Matt, did you want to add?
Mine are very simple. Write the thank you note, handwrite it, and send it. It sounds so basic, but you'll be amazed how far it can go. And then be bold and fearless in reaching out to people. You have nothing to lose by reaching out to people who are doing work that you are interested in or that you admire. And I say that it has worked for me more often than I can count. I've just cold called or cold emailed people and had the opportunity to say, listen, I like what you're doing and I want to be a part of it. And more often than not, you'll be surprised that they'll try and find a way to include you.
Awesome. Awesome. That's great. Anyone else?
Sure, I can jump in here because younger Trisha had so much to learn, okay? I would say jump in. Don't worry about that. Stop thinking you don't have enough experience or you need more of an education or you need something else. Just stop thinking about that and jump in. And I want to echo what Sara and Matt are saying. Volunteer, get involved, meet new people. And that can seem overwhelming, especially if you're going to school and you're working. But that's super important. And I have to tell you, you're right, Matt, that thank you note, I wouldn't have thought of that, but a handwritten note, especially now, goes a long way.
Yeah.
I think that's great too. The other thing is I'd say to build on that is one, follow up. If someone sort of offers you an opportunity to do something or speak with them, whatever, follow up. I'm thinking about all the missed opportunities that I had along the way because I just didn't follow up. And then the other one is ask the question. If you're not sure, ask the question. It's okay. And in fact, when I started just asking the question, I feel like I got many more answers that I needed to figure out what it is that I wanted to do. So if you've got a question in your mind for us or anyone, ask the question.
Yeah. And I want to follow up on what Raul said, because when I first set it out, I thought I had to have all the answers. And you don't. You have to find the answers, but you don't need them right away. And it's okay to say, I don't know, but I'm going to get back to you, and just make sure you do.
Good, good. So what inspires you all each day?
I would say my children.
Your children?
Yeah, I have 3 daughters, and their ages 10, 11, and 13. And I would say that given everything that we've sort of experienced this past year, that is what keeps me going. I think, being able to help them grow and learn and understand a lot of the stuff that we're facing right now, I think is really, really important. And getting them involved early on is really helpful too. I've recently just started to do that more and more. And they're actually more capable than I would have ever thought.
Yeah.
Participating in some of these efforts. But that is what keeps me going for sure.
That's fantastic. That's great. Anyone else?
I would add, you know, I'm not sure that this inspires me every day, but it inspires me generally, and I think about it often. Earlier this year, which now feels like decades ago, I had the opportunity to work on Governor Patrick's presidential campaign. And one of the things that I saw him do was quite extraordinary, I thought. On election day in New Hampshire, on the primary day, every polling location we went to, the first person he went over to were the Trump supporters at the polling locations. And he had real substantive conversations with them. And, you know, we live in a very polarized country right now. And I think finding those avenues where we can reach out and find that common ground is the only way we're going to make progress. And so I've tried to emulate what he did in my own life. And I think that that can be used in so many different ways, not just in politics. We don't all have to agree to find common ground.
Great. So my last question before we start taking some questions is, doing this type of work can be really stressful. So what are some ways that you all practice self-care and doing good work for others?
Okay, I'm going to jump in on this because I have thought about this a lot. I know the answer to this. I know the right answer is to tell you all that it's exercise, it's spending time with your family, it's reading a book, it's vacationing. I'm horrible at it. I am horrible at it. I'm trying, but the fact of the matter is, I think the best thing I can do is I prioritize my family, and the self-care is, I'm passionate about the work we do. And I feel like because I enjoy what we do so much, it is super stressful. That's part of my self-care. I enjoy what I do. And at the end of the day, I have both this great job and I have my family that I go home to. But yes, the right answer is exercise, books, vacation. I just don't. Sorry.
A glass of good wine is
I was going to add that in, but I didn't know if that was appropriate.
I echo what Trisha said. Exercise for sure. Even just getting a short walk in. I feel like these days where we're all working remotely, that's been really helpful. Spending time with my family, and once in a while, just taking a day off, honestly. When we were all working remotely, that was the best message I could have ever received from my boss is, will you take some time off, because you're actually not going to be able to carry this time. A lot of people weren't taking it because they weren't traveling. So they were just working more and more and more. Their work is blending into their life, and everyone was really burnt out. And so the big message for us the last several months has been, take some time off, unplug, get away from your computer, go away somewhere. We couldn't go too far, but I will say we've been able to spend time up in Vermont and Maine, where it's a little bit slower pace than Boston. So it's been really nice.
Can your boss talk to my boss?
I know. I'll set that up. I'll arrange that for you.
I also say, just like in the working world, just trying not to spend any more time than I need to on things. So like if someone's asked me to do something, I just wrote down like a response that I use. Well, I won't use it on you all. But it's just like, great idea. I'm so down. Let me know what you need. Boom. That's my email. I'm done. Let me either go on to the next thing or use that free time that I would have spent crafting an email over the next 10 minutes to do something else for myself. And the thing that I like to do is go for walks, like literally a walk to nowhere, just a nice loop or whatever, just to clear my head, be out in the elements, that kind of thing.
Yeah. So it must be stressful. It must be very, and being on the select board in Brookline, and then your job that you're doing on a day-to-day basis, especially in this environment, you must definitely need to be taking those walks and being out in nature.
Crazy, man. It's crazy out there. But what I will say is, and to that question about inspiring, is, people say that, like, that being in politics, for instance, like a thankless job, and I guess it can feel like that way sometimes. But people say thank you all the time, honestly, and that feels really good to hear that people understand like how hard the work is, and that they do say thank you. So to me, that gives me hope for our politics and for our community, when we can disagree on things, but also people recognize that folks who step into the arena are doing their best to try to move us forward.
Excellent.
And that was a great story about Governor Patrick, by the way.
Mm,
I love that story.
yeah. Yeah, that's awesome. Thank you. Well, let's see, what time is it? It is 3:46. So I'm going to ask, we have some questions coming in. One question was, do you have any reading resources to recommend? Anything that you recommend?
I have a couple I'll throw out there. Some of them are old classics. I highly recommend How to Win Friends and Influence People. It was written in the 1930s by Dale Carnegie, and I think a lot of the lessons ring true today. And then more recently, I read a book called Switch by, I just looked up the authors, Chip Heath and Dan Heath. I'm not sure if they're related, but great book on just how to think through making people think differently about issues from a macro perspective.
Oh, sounds really interesting. That's great.
And then I also say always, you can never go wrong picking up something by Malcolm Gladwell.
I know, right?
He makes you think. I have a couple. Purpose Driven Life, I love. I actually revisited that book a bunch, just kind of keeping you focused on what's important. When you've got a million things coming across your desk, I think that's a good one. And the recent one, we actually are partnering with the BU Center for Anti-Racist Research, which has been highly fascinating to be a part of. We just shared Dr. Kendi's book, How to Be an Anti-Racist, with all of our employees. We mailed them to everybody's house because everybody's working remotely. And I'm about halfway into that book. I'm not finished with it yet, but it's really enlightening and really, really a great book. So I recommend that one as well.
Awesome.
I tend to read books on whatever subject we're working on. So right now I'm reading Dreamland because we're doing a lot of work on opioids. Another one I haven't started reading yet, but I just got Cast by Isabel Wilkerson because we're also doing a lot on racial and social justice. So that's what I do so that I can better understand the issue that we're working on at the time.
It's a really good point. Good.
Yeah, I wrote down a couple. One is Braving the Wilderness by Brene Brown. That was really, I literally read it in one sitting. She's just a really compelling writer. She's written a ton of books, but this one, I forget I had it up a second ago. Oh yeah, The Quest for True Belonging and the Courage to Stand Alone is the subtitle. And that standing alone piece and being someone sometimes in a world where you're the only one that you think either I'm crazy or everyone else is crazy, right? And I think that was a really good one. The other one is, I think if you haven't already, go and read the 1619 Project by the New York Times. I think there's so much, important historical information in there, and that, it'll make you a smarter person and it'll piss Trump off. So why not?
Those are great. Those are fantastic. Now I want to read them all. So I did write them down. I'll have to listen to the tape to get that list. They sound fantastic. So another question is as your career evolved, is there somebody special, perhaps a mentor, who inspired you to pursue purpose in your work and your life? And if so, can you share a memory that continues to inspire you today?
I'm happy to jump in here, Anne. Okay. I have a very quick story that this question prompted in my mind. So early in my career was a spokesperson for the Boston Public Schools. I had the real honor of working for a woman who I still admire today and who I consider a mentor, Dr. Carol Johnson, who was the superintendent of the Boston Public Schools. And I remember early in my tenure in that job, the district had come up with a list of schools that they were going to deem publicly as underperforming. It was the first time the district had done that in quite a while, and it was a very big announcement that the district was making. So the list was provided, and I provided it to the Boston Globe as in my job. And it just so happens that there were two schools with this very similar names, and of course I put the wrong school on the list. And a lot of parents were upset, and I was devastated. I thought I had just completely botched this entire thing. And I remember it was one of the few times I remember crying at work because I have so invested in it. And I remember Carol Johnson, the superintendent, looked at me and she said, "Matt, I'm worried about fixing the schools, not what list is in the newspaper. Let's move on." And it was a moment of clarity for me that we're here to actually help kids and families. And the fact that I messed up was going to be, as Mayor Menino used to say, they'd be wrapping fish with that paper by the end of the day. And so we could move on. And it was a good reminder that, while that is an important function, it's not the end of the world, and there's more important, deeper work that has to be done.
Love that story. That's a great story. And I think it's important to realize is that everybody makes mistakes, right? Is that nobody has gone through their career where they've never made a mistake.
That's
So
right.
that was a great story. I love it. Anyone else?
I'll jump in here.
Okay.
So, person who inspired me was my mom, because she would tell me, if you don't like something, you're obligated to do something about it. There's always something. You may not be able to solve the problem, but you can do something to make it better, because crying doesn't solve anything. So that's always stuck with me.
Excellent. That's great. That's really great. All right. So have any of you, another question was, has any of you ever been in a position where you had to either lean in or push back to make a difference? And how did you handle that?
I have one example. So our organization recently was looking at making some hires. We needed to bring in some folks who had different skill set in doing video production and sort of more creative work. And so we usually use agencies for that. But I've sort of pushed the envelope a little bit and inspired us to look at bringing in more interns and co-ops from Boston Public Schools and from area schools. I think that was it's sort of like matching a need with matching their need with our need at the same time. And I do think that there was some pushback at first, that we needed, to move quickly, and we didn't have time to train somebody and all of that. But I do think that sort of philosophy of kind of just always pushing the envelope and thinking outside of the box can go a long way. So that was a recent one where I did get some pushback, but in the end, we landed actually in a good compromise. We ended up with 2 interns and an outside agency. So we did both in the end.
Good.
But it's always good to push back.
Good.
I have one.
Yeah.
Last summer, we did a program in Egypt. And so we had the US Embassy involved, we had a ministry involved, and there were certain subjects that they did not want us to touch. And it was subjects that we know that it was a leadership program, and we know some of them would want to talk about. One would be sexual harassment. Couldn't touch it. And we couldn't come close to making it sound like we were turning them into activists. In Boston, leadership and activism go hand in hand. That's what we do. We teach them how to be their own personal leader, but also how do you take action? So we were walking a fine line on that. But sexual harassment seemed like a pretty big issue to ignore. So we compromised. And since we couldn't necessarily focus on that, we did a self-defense course.
Ah, excellent. Excellent. Oh. Awesome. Creative thinking. So I want to just ask a question of all of you. Is there anything else any advice you'd give, or anything that you want to share about your career that's been impactful that we didn't cover today?
Yeah, I'll say something. First of all, thanks for one of those previous questions came from Professor Steve Quigley, who back when I was an undergrad at BU was I did an independent study, and he was my advisor. And it was, this is in the 90s. It was on public relations and the World Wide Web. So I'm literally dating myself. But as we think, remind me of the question. Sorry, I had an answer, and then that aside took me.
Yeah, anything that you'd want to share or add about your career to share?
Yeah, I think I'll say this. The nights where I went to bed having not said the thing were the most sleepless nights I've ever had. The nights when I said the thing, even when it was difficult, or I was worried about the repercussions, or I was afraid that I might lose my job for saying the thing, or whatever it was, I slept like a baby on those nights. And so I know that this is something that folks throughout their career are going to have to sort of think about, when do I push back? When do I sort of like really, and say, no, this is not acceptable? And when do I need to sort of pull back a little bit and listen and watch? I just encourage you to just follow your gut. And even if you feel like in that first moment, like you need to just hold off for a minute, see how you sleep that night and see how you feel about it. And then maybe come back the next day and push if you need to. But I just wanted to offer that.
That's really great advice. I think that's a really interesting way to think about it when you know that it's time to push back, and sometimes doing that will help you sleep better. So that's great advice.
I have something to add to that. I would say that, don't wait for the perfect time. There really is probably no perfect time. I had some career opportunities come up that were over the years that were probably the worst possible timing in my life to have taken them. I was just getting married, or I was just having my first child, and I, sort of weighed, is this a good time? And if I hadn't jumped on those at that time, they wouldn't be there. So I do think you kind of have to have courage to sort of seize the opportunity when it's there, as opposed for waiting for everything to align and be perfect. I would say also on the topic of mentors, thank you, Professor Quigley, for that question. I think that having a mentor is really important. And from the beginning, I would say seek it out in a mentor from the very, first job that you have. The one mentor that has stuck with me from the very beginning, I'm still with her today. I text her, I FaceTime her. When I have the most stressful decisions to make in my career, I still go back to her. She was my first job, my first boss in my first job out of school, and we're still in close touch now, 26 years later. So it's a really helpful tool to have that kind of sounding board throughout your career.
Totally agree. Totally agree. We have one question is, can an organization strive without finance? Said, I have an organization for the poor in poorer countries, but it needs hands-on. How can I do it?
That's an interesting question. I would like to know more about what they would want to do. I mean, can an organization survive without resources? Depending on the work you try to do, maybe it's with volunteers.
Mm-hmm. Do you have any ideas how they can maybe get resources?
Oh, okay. So that's a whole different.
What he was asking is that can they survive without finance? So the idea of volunteers is good, but then also, can they get resources, or how do they get resources?
That's a harder one. And again, I think it depends on where you are and what you're trying to do. Because where you are, yes, you may be able to tap into an embassy that may help you or may connect you with local resources, or depending on what your mission is, there could be some grants out there that they could go after.
Okay, great. Anyone else have any other ideas about?
I would just say, and we live in a digitally connected world, obviously, and that can be really powerful. It's not easy, but use it to your advantage to help spread the word, and hopefully someone will see it. And if you're interested in it, the chances are that there's someone out there that's also interested in helping. So use that tool to your advantage.
Great, thank you. Thank you. This has been an incredible hour. I just feel like I have gained so much knowledge just by listening to all of you. So I really want to thank you for taking time out of your schedule. Those of you who are watching, thank you again. I want to remind you is that we have these comm talks very frequently. If you go to the BU College of Communication website, we have a calendar that lists the events that we have. Next Wednesday, we will be having journalists who will be talking about the election, and titled An Election Like No Other. Journalists share final thoughts. So might want to tune into that. I think that'll be a great opportunity. And thank you all for being here. It was really great seeing you, and appreciate your time.
Thank you. Thanks, Anne.
Thank you. Thanks, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Bye.